This happened almost 4 years ago. My parents and my husband were visiting my mom's family in Indianapolis. I used to go all the time as a child, but I wouldn't know my way around. I was drinking a lot because my husband had an emotional affair with his ex that lasted 4 months. She tried to break us up. Honestly, I could write a whole post about how she tried to ruin our relationship. So we saw my family and then went back to the hotel. I was upset, so I said that I was going to smoke. In reality, I was going to the hotel bar. I got multiple double vodka shots with a splash of orange juice, and I was feeling good. The bar was closing, so I asked the bartender where there was another bar, and she told me to go to TGIF's. It was about a 10-minute walk. Remember, this was after 10 p.m. and I was already pretty drunk. I went inside and I got more drinks. I don't remember how I got back outside, but I was smoking and there were people outside in the parking lot with me. Suddenly, I was being dragged into a car. I don't know how long it had been. I was so drunk that I couldn't do anything or even realized how messed up I was. During this time, my husband realized that I was missing and woke up my mom in my parents' room, and he tracked my phone to the TGIF parking lot. My mom and husband got to my phone, but I wasn't there. Then my mom saw this man trying to get me in his car. She got out of the Uber that they were in and started screaming to let me go. And this guy thought that my mom was just a stranger trying to save me. He didn't believe her, and I remember her yelling. I only remember him saying, "How do I know she's your daughter?" and something like that. He had grabbed me, so I had bruises on my arm. My mom threatened to call 911, which I was told later, since I was almost in his car. He let go of me and drove off with his back passenger door wide open. I'm convinced that I would have been taken at the very least. I was unfamiliar with the area, I was drunk, and I barely realized how bad the situation was. I was taken to the hospital, checked in. I was released the next day. I didn't hear about what my mom and my husband saw until we got home, since we were driving home that entire day. I'm a mother of 2 daughters and live out in the country. My husband is a welder and a really outgoing and charismatic guy, which means that he has tons of friends that will periodically stop by to hang out with him. In fact, there are some friends he trusts enough to use the tools in his garage and stay at the house when he isn't home. Well, one late evening he was gone when I heard someone pull into the driveway. We have 2 dogs who were going nuts with barking at the picture window in our living room. I looked out and saw a familiar looking blue blazer, and assumed my husband's friend, Bob, was over to use something from the garage or to wait for my husband to get home. He hadn't knocked on the door, so I figured they had already talked to each other about it. No big deal. But the dogs wouldn't stop barking and growling, which just didn't seem right because they knew Bob. So I looked more closely out the window and realized that there was a man lingering near the garage, but he was not Bob. In fact, I had never seen him before. I decided to take my dogs and go outside to see who he was and what he wanted. He had told me that he lived down the street and that he knew my husband. He was very friendly and began telling me all about how he had to move out of his house because he and his wife were divorcing. He seemed quite familiar with my husband, and even asked about our dog, Pepper, who had passed away a few months prior. Pepper was a very smart and protective dog, and could be scary if he thought harm would come to me or my family. He didn't realize that Pepper had died, and really seemed genuinely apologetic about it. Meanwhile, I noticed that my dog's shadow still hadn't settled down around this guy. He wouldn't let him pet him, and the hair on his back was sticking straight up. And he would intermittently growl during our conversation too. This was really odd for him, and I was pretty confused because this guy seemed really nice. After chatting for a while, he asked for my husband's number so he could call him. That was a red flag for me, because my husband wanted someone to have his number, he would have given it to them. So I told the man that I would give him a call right then. I called my husband in front of the man, who suddenly looked a little nervous. I explained to my husband that Jim from down the street was at the house to visit him. Immediately, my husband told me to tell Jim to get off our property and to never return. This scared the crap out of me, because like I said, my husband is really friendly and hospitable usually. He told me to make the man leave and he was on his way home. I ended up making up some excuse to Jim. For some reason, I just couldn't say something so mean to him after he had been so friendly and polite to me. And he backed up right away, suddenly quick to leave. My husband arrived home a short time later and explained that Jim was a severe drug addict who had been stealing from all of his neighbors' garages. His wife threw him out of the house because of this, and he's been desperate for cash to support the habit. He was probably scoping out what he could steal from my husband's garage and seeing what obstacles my dogs would be in his way. To think he could have harmed me or my kids, it makes me furious. But he seems so nice, and I felt like an idiot for not realizing the truth. I've learned my lesson now though. If somebody comes over that I don't know while my husband is out, I just call him right away. Update. My husband told me tonight that Jim was arrested and is currently in jail now. He apparently was caught robbing from my neighbor's garage. Good riddance. For a little background story, I am a scout since I am 8 years old. And last year, I was the leader of my team, so I had to do all of the paperwork and calls for finding places to camp. It was mid-November and I had to find a place to camp. But since I was lazy, I decided to wait a week before the actual weekend. A week before the weekend, I decided to call some owners so I could have a place to sleep. As I call many numbers, all the owners are unavailable or simply not there. But then I see a number which I had never called before, since it was at the end of the list. I called it and an old lady picked up the phone. I do the basics presentations and all, and she agreed to let me and my team stay at hers, and we're making agreements. In the afternoon, I go to her property to check everything such as potable water, the place to put the tent and the campfire. The place is kind of dark, but it's nice. The week passes and Saturday finally arrives. The Saturday is going well and we had some great games and ate a lot, and we had a good night show. As they go to sleep in the tent, I stay awake to finish paperwork for the next day. It was now about midnight and I decided to go to sleep because we had to wake up early to go to church. As I switched off the flashlight, one of my newbies, we are 8 in total, wanted to go to the bathroom, aka a tree, and asked me to come with her. I can understand because it's better to be accompanied at night, especially in the woods. Well, she does her business and I suddenly hear some noises far away, but not that far. I tell myself that it's nothing. It must be some animals trying to find food. We go back to the tent, and that's when I hear footsteps approaching. As I hear those footsteps, I remain calm and tell myself, maybe it's the old lady just checking to see if we made a fire too close to the tent or something. But I still had an odd feeling because it's midnight, and why would she do it at this hour? Then I hear no more footsteps for about 10 minutes, and then I hear more coming to our tent. Thankfully, all of my girls are sleeping, because they would have been scared. I was the oldest and they were about 3 or 4 years younger than me. As I hear footsteps which seem to come from one person, I hear others coming from the back of the tent, and I was like, okay, this is getting weird, I need to do something. I checked the tent by the inside and thank God, one of my newbie had left some embers from the fire, so I could see what happens between the fire and the zip of my tent. A minute passes by, and a silhouette is there just between the fire and my tent. I stop breathing. I literally froze. I started to move towards my phone when I saw the silhouette coming closer to the zip of the tent. I sent a message to one of my bosses who were always camping in the near areas if something happens. But I knew that she would take too long, so I had to think of something, and to think fast. That's when I had an idea. I put my alarm on like a big siren, because sometimes we would do like night games and wake up in the middle of the night. So I put my bell on and my girls woke up. The silhouette had started to unzip. I actually saw fingers from below. But as the silhouette heard my girls waking up, she or he sprinted back to where he came from. And that's when I saw two other silhouettes sprinting back in the same direction. Everything ended well. 20 minutes later, my boss came and stayed the night. And I never had to deal with those silhouettes again, thankfully. I had moved to a new area, and so I was learning my new bus routes and stops to and from uni. I was on my way home late one evening, and as I tapped my card, there was a lady probably in her 60s sitting up front at the seat behind the bus driver. As I got in, she wrinkled her nose up at me. I chalked this up to her maybe being a little old-fashioned, as I was wearing ripped jeans and an AC/DC shirt. But I don't look tough or mean in any way. I was kind of taken aback by her intense reaction, but I soon forgot about it. By the time I pressed the button to call for my stop, the bus driver overshot and missed it, which he realized immediately, and apologized to which I replied, "It's okay, no worries." And he goes to pull over at the next stop further up. The bus was empty at this point, save for a person up in the back and the grumpy one up in the front. As I got up to get off, the older lady turns right around in her chair with the ugliest look and begins to berate me in a loud voice. "Are you stupid? Why would you press that button, you idiot girl? I hope you never drive, you'll kill someone. And you've wasted my time, you idiot." Over and over again. And the bus driver looked back for a second dumbfounded, but he stayed out of it. She had these dagger eyes fixed on me as she just became louder and more angry. And I just ended up avoiding her gaze as I was so confused and intimidated. I was half in shock on how nasty and loud she was being towards me. So when the next stop came, I quickly made for the exit, and all I could say was, "Yeah, okay, cool." She would just lean towards me, almost sticking her face into my shoulder that I felt her brush against me as I walked past. I was freaked out to say the least and darted out the door, and I hear her growl another insult under her voice as the doors close. I hope I never see her again. This happened in the late 2000s when I was 12 years old. I grew up and live in a developing nation, so many of the folks who read here might not completely understand or relate to these circumstances in the incident, but I'll try my best to give any background necessary. I was never given permission to stay out after 7 p.m. for any reason, regardless of the requirement. A movie that ends at 6:30, and I was dropped home by my friend's parents. Nope. Study at my neighbor's house past 7 p.m. No. So I was naturally very excited when I got permission to go watch a late-night movie with all my cousins and stay the night at my grandmother's place. There were 6 of us together, 5 males and 1 female cousin. I was the youngest and the rest were all adults, about mid-20s. The movie finishes at 2 a.m. and we were asked to go straight from the movie theater to home, which was nearby. I was more excited to see the city late at night, more than watching the new movie that was a big hit. We all went in 3 motorcycles to the theater and decided that once the movie was over, we would go to a cafe that was open 24/7 to have some ice cream there. This was the only place that was still open, and it was relatively far away from my grandparents' house. I can't tell you how excited all of us were, because this was a new place that had opened up in my city and was very popular. My friends used to brag about how many times they visited the place, and how beautiful the view of the city lake is in the middle of the night. Once the movie was over and we came outside, except for the crowd from the theater. The roads were completely deserted. Not a soul in sight. Only the streetlights lit up the roads, filled with potholes and nothing. But even the medical stores were open. My female cousin had extremely strict parents, so she decided to come and said that she has to be home because her parents were up waiting for her to get back. We all tried to convince her to come with us. There were 6 of us after all, but to no end. She was adamant that she has to be home, and we eventually decided to let her go. There were 4 of us now, on 2 motorcycles, and we started riding towards the cafe. I was the pillion with my brother riding, and I noticed that 1 motorcycle was following us. It was easy as they were the only other people on the roads. I told my brother immediately, and he said that they were probably going to the same place and to just ignore it. A little further, another motorcycle asked my cousin to stop and pretended to ask for directions. They stopped, thinking these guys were lost, and started giving them directions. While we were talking to the guys asking for directions, 2 more motorcycles showed up and surrounded us, somehow 8 of them suddenly. At this point, we realized that this was an ambush, but it was already too late. One of the guys pushed my cousin from the motorcycle onto the ground and started hitting him. The rest of us were trying to defend him. Once the fighting stops, one of the cousins were bleeding all over already, and they start to ask us to call our female cousin and to tell her to come back. They had been following us from the theater. They said to tell her that they needed to talk to her, so to ask her to come back and he needs to see her. At first, we pretended that we had no women with us, and we didn't know what he was talking about. He told us that he would kill all of us if we didn't ask her to come meet us. The roads were abandoned, and the occasional car that goes on the road would just pass by without slowing down. Most likely, the people in the car were afraid of getting involved. The guys were clearly having fun, laughing while they punched us and kicked us. With no help in sight, one of my cousins punched the guy and yells, "Run," and instinctively we all run in different directions, abandoning our motorcycles on the street. They started chasing us on foot at first, and then went back and got on their motorcycles, chasing us through the streets. Now, I didn't have a phone with me, and I was unfamiliar with the area. I ran randomly looking for a hiding place. I jumped a wall into a random person's house while the motorcycles drove by on the road looking for us. I don't know where the rest of my cousins were, especially the one who was bleeding pretty badly. The house that I jumped into was home to a huge dog who started barking at me, waking up the owners. They obviously assumed that I was there to rob them, but having one look at a 12-year-old boy in tears and clearly shaken, they asked me what had happened. I explained everything and told them that I had no idea where my brothers were. They gave me a phone and I called the police, who said they would send a car and we could expect it in 2 hours. I had all of my brothers' numbers memorized but didn't want to call them, as I was afraid they might be hiding and a ringing cell phone might give it away. I thanked the kind people who offered to host me until the morning, but I had to get back to my grandmother's place to find out if my cousins had made it back. I sneaked through the streets and found my grandparents' house. 2 of my cousins made it back, but my brother was still out there. Finally, he calls us and tells us that he's in hiding and will come back once the sun comes out, and there's general crowds outside. Until dawn, the motorcycles kept passing by our house, and we were afraid they had followed one of us home. At dawn, my brother gets back, and I was the only one uninjured. One of my cousins got stitches on his face, and another one broke his ribs, and my brother had a hairline fracture. We all ran through the night, and suddenly, all these strict imposition by our parents make sense to us. My brother had called the cops too, but no one ever showed up. There was no support from anyone. And I can't even imagine what would have happened if my female cousin was with us. We never got a call back from the cops to ask if we were fine. I can't begin to imagine what would have happened if they had caught one of us. Needless to say, we never went out anywhere late at night for a long time.